Welcome to Gears Action Growth, shifting business culture one conversation at a time. My name is Dr. Josephine Paladmo, and my superpower is creating business cultures that transform organizations team by team. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Iain Butterworth, and we discuss our reactions to the new show on Apple TV called Severance, and how it raises questions for us about how we manage our personal and work lives. We absolutely love this show, and I loved this conversation. I'm really excited about this conversation today, Iain, because I am so excited about this show that you recommended to me and having a conversation about the content. Firstly, the show that we're going to talk about is Severance, and I went onto Apple TV. I didn't have a subscription. I just subscribed just to watch the show, and it is absolutely stellar. So maybe people listening haven't watched the show. It's okay. We'll describe some of the things that that are in the show, but we'll also talk about the amazing concepts that then we can apply to work and our lives and what's happening today. So it is so current. So thank you, Iain, for giving me that opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure.
So we're going to talk about Severance, which is a new series on Apple TV, and it has a stellar cast. So it has Christopher Walken, Adam Scott, Patricia Arquette, and a host of other amazing people. It's directed by Ben Stiller, and there's a number of executive producers. There's like a team, but I think Patricia Arquette is one of the producers as well. And it is just 5-star quality, isn't it, Iain? We just loved it.
Everything about it is perfect. The plot, the casting, the script, the look, the lighting, the set design, the music, the sound design.
It is. And you know what? We loved it because it is so well done and so thought-provoking, isn't it? It just makes you think. So for people that haven't watched the show, let me give them a little bit of a brief. So the main character, Mark, leads a team of office workers whose memories have been surgically divided between their work and their personal lives. When a mysterious colleague appears outside of work, it begins a journey to discover the truth about their jobs. So the premise is that they have gone through this process of severance, and it's a new technology. It's a so there's a number of things you see in the show around that technology, but it's a new technology which allows people to really separate or cut off their work lives and their personal lives, so that when they're at work, they have no memory of who they are in their personal lives. And when they're in their personal lives, they have no memory of who they are at work. So it's an absolute severance of memory. And I actually went into Wikipedia to look up severance, and severance is the action of ending connection or relationship, dividing by cutting or slicing. And there's a little bit of a almost a horror angle to the series, isn't there? It's because of this such a impactful and significant thing that these people have taken themselves through and made themselves quite vulnerable because of that process.
Absolutely.
So
And
Iain,
the set design reinforces that too. It has a 1960s washed out look, a little bit like
yes,
Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Get Smart. The color palette is like that. So it for me,
yes.
it conjures images of sort of Cold War. It sort of that mood that you were just describing. It's reinforced through everything.
Exactly. And I think it's set in present to future tense. So you're not quite sure, because there is this 50s sort of vibe going on. So it's almost like perhaps arcing back to that, but it is set in the clothing and everything is sort of set in a present tense. So
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
current sort of. So Iain, tell me what really was the standout for you. Why did you say to me, Josie, you have to watch this show?
Look, maybe it's because I watched Looney Tunes as a child, and my favorite Warner Brothers cartoon, one of them was The Sheep and the Wolf that clock on at the entrance to the forest. And at the gate, they say, "Oh, hello, Ralph. Hello, Sam." and they clock on and then go into the park, and then they become prey and the prayer, whatever that term
The
is.
predator?
Predator. Thank you. Speaking of Severance, it's a Friday morning. Um, so I've always been fascinated by the idea that we become someone different when we go to work. It's
Mm,
always interested me,
mm,
and the very act of commuting. Um,
the
you know,
transition.
yeah, and typically the way our cities have been designed, anyone that watched Mad Men would know, Don Draper, the white executive, leaves his wife and children and black maid at home and heads into New York City and becomes someone else or becomes more of who he is or whatever. But
Yes.
he certainly
Yeah.
severs his private life behind.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and it's always interested me. What does it take to be your whole self, no matter where you are, including where you work?
Exactly. And that's been my whole life passion. I did my PhD in I completed it in 2005, and the topic for my PhD was this issue of uh, how do we how do we bring both sides of ourselves to work? And I was looking at particular gender identity in that, masculinity and femininity. So I've got this. So for me, it's fabulous because it's such a topic that I've done a lot of reading about. There's a lot of applications for me, but let's go through it. We're going to look at some of the things we love, and just for listeners that haven't seen the show yet, we're not going to give you any spoilers because there is an amazing plot twist at the end, but let's not give that away. But we will talk about some of that as well. So, so firstly, Ian, you were commenting the other day about that horrible office rituals when they're at work. So
Oh
there
my
is a
God.
team of four, and there's always a team of four and a manager, and the manager forces them to go through these terrible office rituals. So tell me a little bit
Yeah,
about your impression of that.
when they achieve a target, they have to do things. I'm struggling not to give away what actually happens because I don't want to ruin it for people. But they're the sort of cringy things that you normally are forced to do at weddings or, you
I
know,
think we can talk about that. So let's talk about one in particular where the disco music comes on
uh-huh,
in the office.
yes. Um, I mean, I have endured office Christmas parties where I'm forced to put on a blonde wig or tinsel hat or, and basically endure this forced joviality
Yeah,
when I really just
exactly.
want to stick a steak knife through my eyes.
Karaoke, and I know, and it's always hard, isn't it? Because there's this social pressure to participate, and it's
Hmm.
so cringy. It really is, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
but in particular, I think in the show it was even more cringy because they were in their office space, so they were actually in those grey walls pretending like they were in this other space where there was this party going on.
Yeah.
And they're in their grey, suits as well, so it
I
was
think
really
it's
telling.
for me, those rituals are an interesting example of myth making within an organization. Those sorts of rituals are supposed to give employees a window into the soul of the organization. Um, but I guess, I don't know. I associate those things as part of the cringy sort of Amway, um, those sorts of pyramid organizations that create the mythology, and you need to become part of the tribe. And
Yes.
those are rituals that are meant to be
Yes.
expectations that you belong and that you're participating and cohering with those informal requirements.
Yeah.
And if you don't participate, you're immediately identified as the other, um, or as someone who's not hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid sufficiently.
Mm.
Um,
Well, there is
yeah,
that. There is that. And when I work with teams, I actually talk to them about the rituals that they're either developing if they're just starting, or they've developed and maintained. And often so rituals are important to that, because even when you think about our bonds, the way in which we
totally.
bond together socially. But I think we need to really have an alignment between what's happening in those rituals and what we're doing in other parts of that organizational life. And I think for Severance in the series, there was this stark
Mm,
difference between what they were doing in those rituals, which is we're all friends and we care
yeah,
about you and we're giving you great food and we're
yeah,
getting you to dance in the office. And then the other parts of what they were doing to them, because they were treating them quite poorly. You know,
yes,
there was some, again, this is a horror in some, mild horror in this series. And some of the things that were happening were absolutely just out of the park,
yeah,
out of the park, treating them very poorly, treating them like they weren't even individuals.
yes,
And so I think it's that. And I know organizations where that happens, where there'll be a Christmas party or there'll be a, ritual, there'll be team rituals going on, but it doesn't come across as, it doesn't actually lead to increased engagement or bonding because it's so stark. It's such a stark difference between that and then what's happening in the rest of the organization. And
That's interesting because it's almost like those rituals are about forced conviviality and belonging, whereas some of the other rituals that take place are actually about dehumanizing and othering and
yes,
gaslighting in a way.
exactly.
And so
That's
there's
right.
a disconnect between the overall behavior that occurs within the organization and these rituals which sort of give lip service to some fake notion of community.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. And that fake notion of community, I think, is the key word there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. Um, so there was we loved Patricia Arquette in this series. So because of, I mean, it was a great role for. I love Patricia Arquette anyway, but it was such a great role for her, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad she's moved on from Medium. Let me just say that.
That was my
Um,
late night,
yeah,
late night
guilty
show.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yes, her character is very, very interesting. Um, again, I don't want to give too much away, but uh, she plays multiple roles and portrays multiple selves at different times.
Mm.
Um, and it's very interesting to see the underlying covert aim behind it all. Uh, she comes across as very threatening and unnerving in a way. I cringed every time she came on the screen,
She was amazing, wasn't it?
which is a sign of a good actor.
And we can say she's the director of the facility in a way. So she's the perhaps the there are she reports to the board. So she feels
Hmm.
like a CEO to me who reports
Hmm.
to the board. And you do get that cringe factor from her, but
Hmm.
so I loved the way in which she was portrayed, the style in which that character was portrayed. She was always very blocked in her clothing, very masculine suits, very straight hair, um, and it was very emotionless. So her character
Hmm.
was always very emotionless, and she always spoke in this real kind of low monotone, which gave you a sense that there was this impending kind of impending doom coming, but she was always very regulated in her speaking, and um and she obviously, all those status symbols were status symbols of power. She had the absolute power in that place. And yet when she was at home, because they portrayed her in her home, she actually was, she almost looked like the sweet little old lady that lives next door. She
Hmm.
portrayed that character, and we were sort of
Hmm.
talking about whether that was, you know, whether the character was a fake persona or a real persona. And I think we differ on that, because I actually saw what she was portraying was this more emotional, nurturing self when she was at home, whereas she was this stark bureaucrat, director, executive in the office.
No,
So
I
it
saw
was
her as utterly fake, and I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. I I
well,
would
you might
not
be right. You might be right.
I would
Yeah.
not borrow a cup of sugar from that person.
Even when she makes her cookies.
No, no, I wouldn't eat the cookies either. I wouldn't know what was in them.
And Ian, you commented because you've seen women dress like that in your work experience. So tell me a little bit
Hmm.
about that.
My time working in government, there are a few people that stand out, and I guess this is the problem. I feel bad talking about it because men can wear the most
Mm.
ghastly, ill-fitting suits and they
Oh,
get away with it,
yeah,
or they can be slobs and they get away with it. Whereas women sort of, I think if they want a certain level of power and to be seen as powerful in those contexts, one used to wear the most enormous, chunky jewelry. Um, it was sort of like she was wearing sort of Stonehenge style stones around her neck. I don't know how she could walk. One came to work. One was a very senior government person who wore. I remember seeing her in an incredibly thick coat.
mm,
It was almost like an armadillo's carapace. It was like a shell,
mm,
and I assumed it was a suit of armor. Well, that's how I read it. Um, and I remember there was another senior person whose office was, as I recall, adorned with giant photographs of predatory birds.
that would be very much in line with Patricia Arquette's character. Yeah.
And the irony was, this person, I think she had imposter syndrome, and she covered up for the fact she didn't really understand anything that she was presiding over
Mm, mm,
by sitting. We used to say that she would sit on memos until they died, sort of drawing on the bird theme, because things got incredibly congested and
yeah.
decisions that were very timely and important were not being made because this person couldn't bring herself to actually make a decision.
Mm.
But the semiotics of her room were, if you come in here and you act like a lamb, I will, grab you by my talons and take you up to my nest
Amazing.
and feed you to my chicks.
Yeah. Yeah, scary. And even when my experience of working in corporate organizations too was there was this sense that the dress code was very masculine, firstly, as a woman, very masculine, to be treated to seriously, but also without color. So,
Uh,
the dark blues and the blacks and the greys. And when did we decide that that was the color palette, right? So I would actually, because I love color, I would actually wear a lot of color in the office. But I was always one of the few managers who wore color. My colleagues all wore pretty, um, and sometimes women, my colleagues would wear scarves that were colorful, I think, and that was a way of kind of bringing color in. It's almost like this, is that an unconscious kind of, um, you know, offering
Pushing
to
back or,
ourselves? Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I just don't know. When did we decide that color meant you're not serious about
Yeah.
what you're doing?
I notice a lot of women in senior government roles. I'm thinking too of American public service, where one very bright color for their whole outfit. It will be bright red or bright blue, but there won't be any variation. It's
No
just one
patterns.
color, just one giant color.
Yeah, a
Um,
block.
but I mean, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Because if they wear something flamboyant, then they have the shock jocks criticizing their clothing choices.
Exactly, exactly. And women are scrutinized around all of these things, and that's our point, isn't it? That men are not
Hmm.
scrutinized, women are scrutinized around all these things, and there's no good reason for that to be happening. Yeah, absolutely. So Ian, the other question we had was, why would you choose Severance? And the characters in the show go through some of that. You see an arc back in terms of their history and some of the ways in which they are perhaps coping with life. And a lot of, particularly the main character, chose to be severed, due to the grief of losing his wife. And then you see this chorus of friends around him who are questioning his choice, and they're
Mm,
like the Greek chorus in Greek dramas that are, perhaps, bringing in another voice, or another voice of reason, or another perspective on the situation, and they're questioning it from a moral and ethical perspective.
hmm.
But the actual main character was, his original, I guess, motivation was to at least not feel grief for half the day. So, what did you make of that?
Uh, um, I once worked with someone who spent all their time traveling, um, because it was clear that their home life was something that they wanted to escape. Um, and I think they made a psychological severance by creating geographical distance. Um, Actually, while we've been talking, I've been thinking about my earlier Mad Men Don Draper statement, and you know, he left his black maid at home who was doing all their housework and probably unsung and
Mm,
trapped. But there were a few people of color that emerged in that Manhattan office in the 60s in which it was
mm,
set, and they had to go through um, uh, a forced severance where they actually had to sever the reality of the discrimination that they faced every single
mm.
moment of their day and go into this office where they had to pretend that everything was fine and dandy.
Interesting.
And there were some queer characters in that too that were probably having to quote unquote live a lie because of the overriding
Yeah.
social pressures of the time. Um, so I think for those people, severance is almost like an unconscious forced or a conscious forced
Mm,
survival mechanism.
mm-mm.
Whereas for other people, people who are white, people who are male,
Yeah.
the severance, it might be for any number of other reasons.
Mm,
But part of it might be about wanting to fit in. Part of it might be about wanting to become that successful persona in their work life because
yeah.
their private life is a mess. Um, I don't know. What do you think?
I think part of it, I mean, it's all of that. And I think it's also the fact that, we often, uh, perhaps don't have the skills to deal with really big emotions. And so a way of, avoiding that is by really avoiding the emotion. So, and severance is the absolute end of the continuum on that. I think that, through our family lives, through our early socialization, through our education, we often don't really perhaps see good role models around, dealing with big emotions, particularly, or any, some of us don't have any role models around us when we're young, around, that of merit, that would be, informing us about how to deal with emotions. So I think that there's a lack of, it's a lack, almost like a lack of skill and capability, and therefore, what we do is want to avoid that uncomfortableness around that, or avoid the feeling of loss around that, and we retreat. So I think that there is a lot. I think that perhaps the organizational, um, template that has really been built around that 1950s or 60s version of the male, bureaucrat or executive, because that's where a lot of our templates come from, uh, is one where the men of that era were very happy to leave emotions at home.
Mm. It's almost like the organizational culture, the promotion opportunities, the way that one is seen and acknowledged and rewarded at work requires that severance.
Exactly.
Um, it requires someone to be available at all hours.
Mm.
It disadvantages women. And you and I were talking just the other day about we still design cities where childcare options are usually left in the suburbs,
Yes.
It's very hard for people. Why can't we build offices with childcare facilities contained in the building? Well, I mean,
Exactly.
I know some people would prefer to have childcare close to where they live, and I get it. But to only have one option,
That's
it
right.
seems to be based on a kind of severance that you leave your family at home. You certainly wouldn't nip out at lunchtime and check in on the kids.
Yes, yeah.
And maybe I think COVID's blown that apart in some ways
Mm.
because I mean, there are times when working from home is a real blessing, and obviously there are times where it's a curse, especially if there are other people in the house that you actually do need some quiet time away from. But I don't know, maybe severance, the reverse of severance has occurred during COVID, where we've all been thrown together in
Yes.
environments that aren't ideal for working in.
That's right. That's right. I think that has, and what we've shown is that we can do that and still be productive.
Absolutely.
So that's because I think that that was also the assumption that we had to be severed in order to be productive. And so,
Yes.
you don't take personal calls during the work hour. You don't run off to do an errand during the workday. It's all of that. And what we've shown is that people, if you leave people to manage their day, manage their life in the way that best suits them, and you're kind of you're sort of building that strong team and strong environment around them, they will actually do the right thing, and they will be able to manage the competing demands. And so you're not expecting people to just leave all of those responsibilities, or even the mindsets at home. We're bringing them all into the workplace. So, but I think we still have cities that are designed on that traditional template. We have these high rises that are cubicles that
Yeah.
are they're not multifunctional. There's no childcare. There's often recreational activities are not where the work is being done. They're often in separate precincts. So I think I mean, maybe there are cities that do this better, but I certainly don't think Melbourne is designed that way.
Well, I guess a 20th century phenomenon was the single zoning use of a particular piece of land. And so the commercial activity occurs in one part of the
Mm,
city, the recreation in another, the production of food in another, the education and childcare in another, blah, 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 blah. The really vibrant places are where it all happens all at
together.
once.
And I remember my first trip to Manhattan, a long time ago now. And that's what struck me. There was this city, and people were living in the city. And
Hmm.
I remember I stayed with a very good friend, and we walked to her office building. And during that walk, she dropped off her laundry. She went to the cafe and had the coffee. And,
Yeah,
if she had children at the time, she would have dropped them off nearby. And
yeah,
then she's walking to her office building. At
yeah,
lunchtime, she's picking up her laundry. Like, it's all happening in one place. And you walk by, and there's a basketball court there, and some other people, and there's a little park here. And it's all in one place. And Manhattan, I think, is, parts of Manhattan have that sense of
there are hidden
that.
costs though, and it's happening in Melbourne too. The people that work in the 7-Eleven and the Starbucks can't afford to live
Exactly.
nearby. So they're
Exactly.
schlepping in from Long Island or New Jersey or
That's
whatever and
true.
enduring long commutes. So I guess the challenge is for a really livable place, the affordability and diversity of housing is often
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
deal breaker.
And that's government policy. It's got to be driven by government policy. Absolutely.
Hey, what do you think about organization cultures where there's not enough severance? While we're talking, I'm thinking of workplaces that I've worked
Ah,
in the health and community
I was going
sector,
to
the
say health.
or
Yeah.
the NGO sector. It's like,
Yeah.
leave your private stuff at home. I don't want to hear about it. It's impacting on your work and mine.
Yes.
Um, you know, let's have a bit of severance when you come up the elevator. Just leave your psychodrama at home, please.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. So there is this sense that when we're at work, there's a professionalism, or some other things come into play, and I think that, um, And I think that what we've got now is this trend towards personal leadership or authentic leadership. But that doesn't mean that you spray your unregulated emotions all over the office
Oh
space
God.
or all over the team. What you need, there absolutely needs to be some regulation. And in some ways, the way that I manage that, because I do meet teams like this that are so caught up in the personal drama of what's happening
Mm,
that they lose sight of why they're together. And
yeah.
so that's why when I work with teams, I bring them back to, what are you all here to do?
Yeah.
How are you going to work together to do that? The rest, and some of that is absolutely they have to get to know each other and trust each other and be able to communicate with each other. But also part of that is we need focus time to work. We need to, when we're solving problems, we need to focus on that. We need to have a solutions orientation rather than repeating problem statements all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So because often people who talk about the drama are people who are repeating problem statements all the time.
Interesting.
So, so I think that there are definitely different team rituals that you can kind of put in place to
Mm,
overcome some of those cultural. But you're absolutely right. There has to be this sense that we're all here to do something. That's why
mm.
we're all here together.
I've worked in organizations devoted to empowerment and participation in governance by the people most affected by the issues.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about some of my early work in the community response to HIV/AIDS, where
Mm.
people were so damaged and hurt by what was going on at that moment, let alone a whole life spent being socially excluded, that when they had a taste of power within that organization, the governance structures and systems and the management decisions, the staff supervision were not up to the task of helping people separate their unresolved, very deep personal
Yeah,
and I was feeling like thinking that there needed to be special organizational systems put in place to help people process that stuff,
exactly.
but then actually ensure that a little bit of what you weren't talking about severance, you were talking about communion, weren't you? It's not about cutting that stuff out, it's actually
Yes,
finding a way to harness it and turn it into
in a
something productive.
productive way. Exactly,
How do you
exactly.
do that? Talk to me about that.
So communion is where we see ourselves as part of the ecosystem, and the opposite to that, agency, or in some ways severance, is where we see ourselves as individual and the individual to the environment. So if we're thinking about ourselves from a very deep identity level as being part of the ecosystem or part of the environment, then that means we make choices about things that in a different way. So what I'm talking about here as an example is if you were working with a team and you wanted to bring more of the community in for a level of engagement, but that there's some past trauma there, or there's sometimes from an organizational perspective it can be some distrust, for example, as well, between that's gone on between that organization and that community, or it could be even within an organization where you have managers and employees and there's been some disruption. You have to deal with that. So if I attack it from a communal perspective, the first thing I'm going to apply is nurturance before I go into empowerment and action. I think we go into to your example, you can't bring people in on and expect them to be doing things when they actually just need to be heard. They need to be listened to. Um, you can't, for example, bring a team in that's been affected adversely by a restructure and focus them straight away on the future without recognizing and respecting the past and allowing them to voice that and have some kind of ritual where they are choosing to let that go and go forward. So this is we need a real understanding of not only what we need but what others need, and bringing that into the plan around how we manage that, how we manage to go from perhaps a state of inaction to action, or how we manage to bring people into the organization so that they're adding value. But so I don't know if those rituals happened in your in
Mm.
your but that in your example, but that level of um, communal thought comes from, in some ways, a deep understanding ourselves that we are part of something that's bigger than us. So a part of, and it can be, sometimes you can get that by bringing people um, to a better understanding of why they're there, in terms of the purpose. And sometimes it's just about enacting compassion and nurturance before you start to go into action.
I'm wondering if there's something called organizational level severance. And it occurs to me that many people working in organizations have endured so many
Yes,
restructures and
yes.
machinery of government changes and rebranding that there's almost a requirement that people are able to just disconnect that
Yeah,
history, that corporate knowledge, and pretend like it never happened.
exactly.
And then sort of hooray, hockey sticks, off we go to this brave new future. And some of those rituals that are
Yeah.
created around organizational myth making and visioning and creating a team culture and team values. I mean, I got tired of going to those things because I just thought, here we go again.
Exactly. It's hollow. It's absolutely hollow. And there is, with change comes loss, right?
Hmm.
So there's, with loss comes grief. That's
Yes.
a big emotion. And in the organizational setting, you can deal with that. You can absolutely deal with that by recognizing the past, by respecting the past, by giving homage to where we've come from. But then, and then when people hear that, it's only then that they're ready to move on and get excited about the future, and then you can do all those other things. But otherwise, people get a bit cynical because they feel like they're undervalued, or they feel like that past experience doesn't matter anymore, and their contribution and their passion and their sweat and their effort hasn't been recognized. And so often through restructure, we have to deal with that grief and loss. There has to
Mm.
be somewhere where you go, and there's lots of ways to do that. There's some really beautiful rituals you can do. I did this really great ritual once where I got the team to bring in photos from the past, because the team had been together in a different form. And I got, and you take photos at work, and we
Mm.
brought them in and we put them on the wall. These are our memories. We're not going to lose these memories
Mm.
by going into something new. These are our memories. We're going to, we're going to bring them in. We're going to bring them into the environment, and this will strengthen us to go forward. So it's things like that, very easy things that you can do if we're thinking about people, if we're thinking about what people need, and if we're thinking about ourselves as part of something greater. And often I think in organizations, particularly in bureaucratic organizations, there are demands that come into play. And look, managers do the best they can. We often give them a really hard shtick because they are actually doing the best they can. They often have to make really tough decisions, and they are not the evil presence in the room, apart from those that are portrayed in Severance. But what we need in those management decision making forums is this understanding about the whole ecosystem, the system. How is this decision going to affect the system? What do we need to do to then make sure that we go back to a state of equilibrium? Because particularly restructures and those kind of changes and disruptions, it's it always has a set of emotions where there's anxiety beforehand and fear, then the change happens, and then there's this loss and grief that nobody deals with, and then we go into doing, and we go
Mm.
into kind of pressure on performance, and people feel squeezed in that context.
So this notion of severance, how do you think that intersects with the preponderance that I note for some organizations to refer to themselves as families? We have a I kind of it kind of sticks in my craw because I mean families are where severance can occur on so many levels.
Yeah.
Um, abuse that occurs within families requires people literally to psychologically sever the trauma from their daily
Yes.
selves.
Yeah.
Um, for me, the people that have talked the most about creating family at work are the ones that are least able to actually
Mm.
create that true conviviality. God knows what their families are like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I certainly didn't enjoy being a conscripted member of their family at
No.
work.
No. And so families can be very hierarchical too, because you have
Mm,
children and adults.
yes.
So families is not a good metaphor for
No.
organizations. And actually, I interestingly, I was doing a workshop just the other day, Ian, where I was asking the team, what metaphor would you use to describe working together? And one of the team members raised an idea that we could be called a family, and the other team members actually said, "No, I don't think so." And because it was one of the managers said we could be called a family, and they
Ooh,
the important thing is who is coining that
yeah.
who is coining that metaphor in that organizational setting. So metaphors need to be agreed. They need to be agreed by everyone. Otherwise, the metaphor is in service of a particular person in the organization or a particular group. So metaphors in like they came up with other metaphors which were much more in keeping with, for example, pieces of a puzzle or skilled soccer team. So they were metaphors that they ended up with rather than a family.
So, is it possible for us when we go into a workplace that requires traveling into the city and going up an elevator to our designated floor and our cube, is it possible to do that in a way that doesn't require severance from the time we get in on the ground floor to the time we get out on level 15? Like, what's required?
I think we can. I think that it takes a lot of thinking from ourselves, from a self identity perspective, but also we're really impacted and influenced by the environment that we enter. So my dream for the perfect workplace, and I sort of created it in my co-working space, was a place where you walk in and the environment reminds you that you don't need to sever yourself.
Uh-huh.
So that to me was natural surfaces, beautiful airy spaces, windows that open, views of nature, and
Uh-huh.
and lots of plants and some open spaces that are conducive to collaboration, and some other more closed spaces that are more conducive to focused quiet. But those spaces to me remind us that we do not have to sever ourselves. So I really do think that there's a lot to do in the built environment around that, and
Oh,
also in
yes.
in the way we design office spaces. And I really wish we had a different word. I think office is a word that makes me think of severing myself. I'm
Uh-huh.
going to the office. I think workplace might be a better, so we've got home and we've got workplace. That might be a better term. But this term office to me makes me think of the stark settings that are in the series.
Yeah, interesting. Hmm.
So lots to think about, Ian. We might close it off there. I've really enjoyed talking about Severance. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we do that? What's your final word on the should you recommend it, or what's your final word on the series?
Take the stairs.
Ah, yes. Take the stairs. Exactly. Exactly. I love
Take the
it.
stairs.
And we are not affiliated with Apple TV or anything like that. But I will put a link on to some of the show details on another site. And yeah, I just think it was just such a beautiful series, and I think they are going into season 2. I
I
heard.
can't wait.
Maybe we'll have to watch it together. We'll do a watch party, Ian. I would love to watch it with you. It would be fabulous. So yeah, amazing.
It
Well,
takes a lot. I mean, I love acknowledging and celebrating perfection. I can be snarky and I do kvetch when I don't
no.
achieve it. But when it's there and it's superb, I have to celebrate it. So I encourage everyone to
Yeah.
watch this. It's superb, and I can't remember a show that's left me gagging for season two because it's
Yeah,
just, oh my God, I
it's
can't wait.
it's beautiful, isn't it? Well, all right, we'll hold out for season two. Maybe we'll do another. We'll have another discussion after we've binged season two. All right, have a beautiful day.
All right, thank you so much.